In front of a packed charity gala, her billionaire husband made his final brutal move. With his stunning new blonde girlfriend clinging to his arm, he called his black wife to the stage and in front of flashing cameras publicly served her divorce papers, cruelly announcing she would be left with the nothing she came from. The crowd watched, captivated by the public execution, the final discard of a woman he saw as a silent, powerless accessory. What he didn't know, what no one in that room could possibly imagine, was that the papers were meaningless. In a hidden safe, she held the real power, the documents proving she secretly owned 90% of his entire billion-dollar empire. He thought he was staging a public execution to end a marriage. He was actually handing over his kingdom to the queen he just tried to dethrone.
The Beaumont Foundation Gala was not a party, it was a performance. Inside the city's grandest ballroom, a universe of old money and new power had gathered under the light of 1,000 crystal pendants that hung from the ceiling like a frozen galaxy. The air was a potent cocktail of Chanel No. 5, expensive champagne, and the quiet, humming sound of influence. Every handshake was a transaction, every smile a negotiation. At the center of this universe, holding it all together with the gravity of his name, was Alistair Beaumont. He stood on the main stage, a modern-day king in a tuxedo so perfectly tailored it seemed to have been spun from shadow and confidence. Alistair was handsome in the way of predators, sharp jaw, piercing blue eyes, and a charismatic smile that could disarm armies or, more often, conceal a devastating attack. Clinging to his arm was Chloe, a blonde woman half his age, poured into a dress the color of liquid gold. Her beauty was a weapon, and tonight, her smile was one of triumphant conquest. Alistair raised a hand, and a hushed reverence fell over the room of 1,000 whispers. The city's elite, bankers, politicians, society doyens, turned their attention to the stage, their faces upturned like flowers to the sun. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Alistair began, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that wrapped around the room. "Tonight, we celebrate the future. We celebrate bold new beginnings, both for our foundation and—" He paused, letting the drama hang in the air, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was a master showman, and this was his grandest stage. His gaze settled on a woman seated at a table near the back. Zora Maxwell, his wife. Zora was a study in quiet elegance, a stark contrast to the glittering peacocks surrounding her. She wore a simple, midnight blue gown that fell without ornament, her only jewelry a pair of simple pearl earrings. She was a woman of profound, understated beauty, with skin the color of rich earth and eyes that held a deep, quiet intelligence. In a room screaming for attention, her silence was a statement. "And tonight," Alistair continued, his smile tightening into something sharp and cruel, "I want to share a very personal new beginning. I'd like to ask my wife, Zora, to join me on stage." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. This was not on the program. A camera flash exploded, then another. Zora did not move. A spotlight, hot and intrusive, swung from Alistair and found her, pinning her in its white-hot glare. The room held its breath. This was a deviation from the script, and the audience leaned in, sensing blood in the water. With a slow, deliberate grace, Zora rose. She walked the long path to the stage, her steps measured, her back straight. She moved with a dignity that seemed to rebuke the sudden, hungry attention of the crowd. She ascended the stairs and stood beside her husband, a portrait of calm in the center of a gathering storm. Alistair did not take her hand. He took a step back, creating a space between them, a chasm. He looked not at her, but at the audience, at the cameras. Chloe, still clinging to his arm, shot. Zora a look of pure, venomous triumph. "For 8 years," Alistair announced, his voice now devoid of its earlier warmth, "Zora has been a part of the Beaumont story. But as I said, tonight is about the future. And my future does not include her." A collective, audible gasp sucked the air from the room. Alistair's mother, seated at the front table, gave a small, cold nod of approval. His father simply stared, his face a mask of indifference. From his jacket pocket, Alistair produced a thick vellum envelope. It was not a speech. It was a legal document. He held it out to Zora, not with the courtesy of a husband, but with the dismissiveness of a man firing an employee. "Zora Maxwell," he said, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's sentence, "I am officially serving you with these papers. Our marriage is over. The cameras erupted in a frenzy of flashes, a barrage of silent explosions capturing the precise moment of a woman's soul being flayed in public. Zora stood motionless as he dropped the final, devastating bomb. "And per the terms of our prenuptial agreement," he declared, his voice rising, "an agreement that nullifies any claim in the event of indiscretion, you will be left with the nothing you came from." The humiliation was absolute, a global spectacle of cruelty broadcast in real time. The crowd was no longer just whispering, they were feasting. The scene was a Roman Colosseum, and Zora was the lone gladiator, thrown to the lions with no weapon and no shield. Chloe's smirk widened. This was her coronation, built on the ashes of another woman's life. But then, something happened that no one expected. Zora did not cry. She did not scream. She did not flee the stage in a torrent of shame. She simply stood there, in the blinding glare of the spotlight, and looked at her husband. And in her eyes there was not pain, not anger, not humiliation. There was pity, a deep, unnerving, almost maternal pity, as if she were watching a foolish child set fire to his own inheritance. Her hand, when she reached out to take the envelope, was perfectly steady. Her fingers brushed his, and he flinched, as if her touch had burned him. She took the papers, a thick, insulting stack of her own undoing, and held them at her side. She then did something that sent a chill through the room. She met Alistair's gaze, held it, and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of surrender. It was a nod of acknowledgement, a nod that seemed to say, "So, this is the path you have chosen. Very well." Without another word, she turned her back on him. She turned her back on the flash of the cameras, on the gaping mouths of the city's elite, on the entire, glittering circus of her own execution. She walked to the edge of the stage, her posture as straight and unyielding as a queen's, and descended the stairs. She did not rush. She did not stumble. Every step was a quiet, deliberate act of defiance. She walked through the stunned, silent crowd, a river of whispers parting before her. She didn't look at any of them. Her gaze was fixed on the grand double doors at the far end of the ballroom. She was not a victim fleeing a scene. She was a sovereign leaving a battlefield of her own choosing. As the doors swung shut behind her, a profound and unsettling confusion fell over the room. The performance was over, but the ending was wrong. They had come expecting tears, a dramatic collapse, a satisfying, messy end. They had been given a quiet, dignified retreat that felt more like a strategic withdrawal than a surrender. Alistair stood on the stage, the divorce papers gone from his hand, a strange, hollow look replacing his earlier triumphant smirk. He had just won, hadn't he? He had just executed the most public, brutal divorce in the city's history. So why did he suddenly feel like he had just made the biggest mistake of his life? Have you ever seen someone respond to a moment of intense public pressure with unexpected grace? What does that kind of strength say about a person's character? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Zora Maxwell did not go home. The grand, cold mansion in the suburbs was Alistair's house, a monument to his ego. Instead, she had her driver take her to a place that was truly hers, a discreet, private penthouse she owned under a corporate name, overlooking the city harbor. From her window, the lights of Beaumont Global's headquarters, a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, glittered like a stolen constellation. His constellation. His kingdom. A kingdom she had built for him, brick by invisible brick. She laid the divorce papers on a glass table, the thick vellum an insult to the memory of what they once were. To understand the profound, almost poetic justice she was about to unleash, one had to understand that Zora Maxwell was never a trophy wife. She was the architect. They had met 10 years ago. Alistair Beaumont was not a billionaire then. He was the charming, handsome heir to Beaumont and Sons Shipping, a tired third-generation firm drowning in debt and incompetence. He had the name, the charisma, and the social connections, but he lacked the one thing a business needs to survive, a brilliant mind. Zora, then a quiet but formidable financial strategist at a boutique investment firm, had that in spades. She came from a family that valued intellect over ostentation, a line of savvy, private investors who had taught her that real power doesn't announce itself, it simply acts. She saw the potential buried beneath the rust of Alistair's company. He saw a beautiful, intelligent black woman who could elevate his social standing and whom he could mold into his vision of a perfect wife. He was a moth drawn to her quiet fire, never realizing he was flying toward an inferno. In the first year of their marriage, Beaumont and Sons was on the verge of bankruptcy. Alistair, panicked and out of his depth, was ready to sell for scraps. It was Zora who saved him. With a significant inheritance her family had left her, a fact she kept entirely to herself, she anonymously injected millions into the failing company through a complex series of offshore trusts. Alistair never knew. He celebrated a miraculous last-minute loan from a mysterious European investor, a fiction Zora had carefully crafted. He never questioned his good fortune. His ego wouldn't allow it. That seed money was just the beginning. From the shadows of their gilded cage, Zora became the ghost in his machine. It was she who drafted the blueprint to transform the antiquated shipping firm into a global logistics behemoth. She who identified the tech startups to acquire, the international markets to penetrate, the very name Beaumont Global. She would spend her nights drafting market analyses and strategic plans, and he would present them as his own in the boardroom the next morning, soaking in the applause. "It's just a little hobby for you, darling," he'd say with a patronizing smile when she'd show him a complex projection. "Keeps you busy." His arrogance was her greatest asset. As the company's value exploded, he became obsessed with appearances, with the narrative that he was the sole visionary, the self-made titan. He didn't want his brilliant wife on the official payroll as a chief strategy officer. The world might discover she was more than just a pretty face. So he devised what he thought was a clever, dismissive solution. Instead of a salary, he had proposed one evening, swirling a glass of brandy, "We'll compensate you with stock options. It's just paper, really, but you can have as much as you want. A little reward for your hobby." He saw the stock as worthless trinkets, monopoly money in a game he owned. He failed to understand that with every successful strategy she devised, with every $1 billion she added to the company's valuation, the worthless paper she was quietly, legally accumulating was becoming a controlling interest. He was so busy building his own legend that he never noticed he was handing her the keys to his kingdom, one stock certificate at a time. His infidelity had begun as the company's success grew, a direct consequence of his manufactured God complex. Zora remembered the first time she knew for certain. It was 3 years ago, at a photo shoot for a magazine cover celebrating his anointment as Titan of the Year. Chloe, then an ambitious model, had been one of the props. Zora had watched from the sidelines as Alistair's hand lingered on Chloe's waist a moment too long, the private conspiratorial whispers, the shared laugh that was too intimate for strangers. It was a language she knew she was not a part of. That night, she'd found a receipt for a diamond bracelet she had never received. When she confronted him, his reaction was not guilt, but contempt. "Zora, for God's sake," he had sighed, loosening his tie. "You're so unassuming. So quiet. Look at me. I'm on the cover of magazines. I need someone on my arm who shines. Chloe shines. You're just a shadow." He had dismissed her strategic mind as hobby work, and her quiet nature as a personal failing, completely blind to the fact that his shine was merely a reflection of her light. From that day on, he grew bolder, his affair with Chloe becoming a poorly kept secret among their social circle, another tool to humiliate his wife into silent submission. Zora stood by the penthouse window, looking down at the city below. The divorce papers on the table were not just an ending, they were a trigger. Alistair's grand public performance was born from the fatal assumption that she was powerless, that she would crumble, that she would accept the nothing he offered her. He had mistaken her patience for weakness, her silence for surrender. He had forgotten the most important rule of the world he claimed to have conquered. The person who signs the checks holds the real power. And as of tonight, she held 90% of them. The secret empire she had built in the shadows was about to see the light of day. And Alistair Beaumont, the king, the titan, the master of the universe, was about to become the first casualty of the world he thought he owned. Is it more satisfying to see a villain defeated by their own arrogance, or by an external force they never saw coming? Share your opinion in the comments below. The days that followed the gala were a media firestorm. Zora's dignified exit had created a narrative Alistair couldn't control, so he decided to burn it all down with a story of his own. The headlines, fed by his ruthless PR team, were brutal. Billionaire philanthropist Alistair Beaumont files for divorce, citing wife's heartbreaking betrayal. The attack was underway, and it was about to get far more vicious. On Monday morning, a team of lawyers from the most expensive and feared law firm in the city descended upon Zora's legal counsel. They didn't come to negotiate, they came to declare war. They presented a formal notice, a legal document thick with malice, invoking Clause 7B of the Beaumont-Maxwell prenuptial agreement. In the world of the ultra-rich, a prenup isn't just a document, it's a weapon. Clause 7b was a poison pill, a relic from a time when Alistair was the one with all the perceived power. It was an infidelity clause, a brutal piece of legal architecture designed for maximum destruction. It stated that if one party could prove adultery on the part of the other, the at-fault spouse would forfeit all claims to any marital assets, including property, investments, and even personal gifts. If proven, Zora wouldn't just be left with nothing. She'd be legally erased from the 8 years she had spent building his empire. Zora's lead counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Reed, stared at the documents spread across her mahogany conference table. Her face was grim. "This is an execution, Zora," she said, her voice tight with professional fury. "They're not just divorcing you, they're trying to annihilate you." On the table was Alistair's proof. It was a masterfully crafted fiction. There were professionally photoshopped images showing Zora in what appeared to be an intimate dinner with an unknown, handsome man. There were sworn affidavits, legally binding statements, from 2 paid-off witnesses. One was a disgruntled former driver Zora had fired for theft, now claiming he had driven her to secret rendezvous. The other was a socialite who had been in Beatrice Devington's circle for years, swearing she had seen Zora acting inappropriately at social functions. It was a web of lies, but it was a legally sound, beautifully constructed web. "They're going to drag your name through the mud," Evelyn warned, pacing the room. "They'll leak these photos. They'll have these witnesses on every news channel. In the court of public opinion, the truth doesn't matter as much as the accusation. They're trying to make you so toxic that you'll be forced to walk away with nothing just to make it stop." The rest of Zora's legal team was in a state of controlled panic, brainstorming defenses. "We can hire a forensic expert to prove the photos are fake," one junior lawyer suggested. "We can depose the driver and prove he was fired for cause, discredit him," another chimed in. Through it all, Zora sat at the head of the conference table, perfectly still. She listened to their frantic planning, her expression as calm and unreadable as a deep, still lake. She let them spin out their strategies, their fears, their righteous anger. When they finally fell silent, exhausted by their own panic, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a razor. "Stop," she said. Evelyn and her team froze, turning to look at her. "Stop all defensive work on the infidelity claim," Zora continued, her eyes holding a cold, hard glint they had never seen before. "Don't hire a forensic expert. Don't waste time trying to discredit their paid-for witnesses. Don't fight them on their chosen battlefield. It's a diversion." Evelyn was stunned. "Zora, with all due respect, if we don't fight this, they will crucify you. His lawyers will paint you as an adulterer, and under Clause 7b, they will take everything." "They are welcome to try," Zora replied, a faint, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "I want you to do only one thing. I want you to file a single, simple, standard motion. It's called a Rule 26A, mandatory initial disclosure." One of the junior lawyers looked confused, but Evelyn's eyes widened in a sudden, shocking moment of comprehension. A Rule 26A was the most basic, unavoidable first step in any civil lawsuit. It legally compels both parties to provide the other with a complete and sworn inventory of all relevant information, documents, assets, everything. It was not a controversial or aggressive move. It was legal housekeeping. To refuse it would be a massive red flag to any judge. "You want a full financial disclosure," Evelyn breathed, the genius of the move dawning on her. "I want a full, sworn, and legally binding financial disclosure of every asset, every liability, every stock certificate, and every corporate holding Alistair Beaumont believes he controls," Zora confirmed. "I want him, under penalty of perjury, to lay all his cards on the table. The real ones." The trap was now set, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. Alistair and his team, so focused on their fraudulent infidelity attack, would see the motion for financial disclosure as a standard, harmless procedure. They were expecting a fight over reputation. Zora was changing the battlefield to one of cold, hard numbers. Alistair was now legally obligated to do one of two things. He could lie under oath, hiding his company's precarious financial state and fraudulently claiming 100% ownership, which, when revealed, would be a federal crime, perjury. Or he could tell the truth, and in doing so, he would be forced to disclose the very ownership documents that proved Zora held 90% of his entire world. He was so obsessed with proving she was a cheater that he was about to walk directly into a legal checkmate. She wasn't just countering his move, she was flipping the entire chessboard. The poison pill he had designed for her was about to become the very weapon she would use to bring his kingdom to its knees. Zora leaned back in her chair, the picture of calm. "Let him have his headlines," she said quietly. "Let him have his paid-for lies. We're no longer playing his game. We're playing mine. What's your favorite underdog turning the tables moment from a movie or a book? Share it in the comments and tell us why it was so satisfying." In the cold, isolating aftermath of Alistair's public declaration of war, Zora had only one port in the storm, Isabel. While the rest of their social circle had either vanished into silent complicity or openly sided with Alistair, Isabel rushed to Zora's side, a perfect portrait of unwavering loyalty. She brought tea, offered a shoulder to cry on, and spoke with a venomous fury that Zora herself could not muster. "He's a monster, Zora. A soulless, narcissistic monster," Isabel fumed, pacing the floor of Zora's penthouse after the tense meeting with the lawyers. "To fabricate such disgusting lies, the photos, the witnesses. It's inhuman. We will fight this. We will burn him to the ground for what he's doing to you." Zora, still wrapped in a fragile calm, watched her friend. Isabel was a society woman, born into the same world of privilege as Alistair, but she had always seemed different. She had a warmth, an empathy that felt genuine. In a world of transactional relationships, Isabel's friendship felt like the only real thing. Zora leaned on her, allowing herself a rare moment of vulnerability. "It's not the lies that hurt the most, Izzy," Zora admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's the public nature of it. He wanted to make a spectacle of my shame. He wanted the world to watch me break." "But you didn't break," Isabel insisted, kneeling beside Zora's chair and taking her hands. Her eyes were wide with what looked like fierce admiration. "You stood on that stage with more grace and dignity than he has in his entire body. You are the strongest person I know." And in that moment, Isabel believed her own words. This is the first crucial lie a betrayer tells, the one they tell themselves. Betrayal is rarely born from pure, cartoonish evil. It grows in the dark, fertile soil of a deeply fractured soul. It's a weed that chokes out loyalty, watered by a toxic cocktail of jealousy, insecurity, and a desperate, gnawing hunger to be seen. Isabel loved Zora, but she also envied her with a bitterness that was a constant, low-grade poison in her veins. She envied Zora's quiet strength, her unshakable composure, the very qualities she was now praising. But most of all, for years, she had been secretly, desperately in love with the idea of Alistair. Not the real man, the cruel, hollow shell Zora saw, but the public persona. The charismatic billionaire, the king, the man who commanded every room he entered. In the warped logic of her own mind, Zora didn't deserve him. Zora, with her quiet intelligence and lack of theatrical flair, was wasting Alistair's brilliance. Isabel saw herself as his rightful partner, the one who could truly match his fire, who could shine as brightly as he did. She had convinced herself that Zora was an obstacle to a destiny that was rightfully hers. So, as she held Zora's hands and offered words of comfort, her mind was a cold, calculating machine, twisting Zora's pain into an opportunity. She was not a traitor. She was, in her own narrative, a warrior fighting for what she deserved. Later that evening, Zora, feeling the immense pressure of the legal battle, confessed a moment of weakness to her friend. "Sometimes," Zora said, staring out at the city lights, "I feel like just walking away, disappearing, letting him have the company, the name, everything, just to make the pain stop." Isabel held her, her voice a soothing balm. "Don't you dare think like that. That's what he wants. You are a fighter." An hour later, Isabel sat in her car, parked on a quiet street, her phone pressed to her ear. On the other end was Alistair's lead attorney. "She's cracking," Isabel whispered, her voice a perfect imitation of concern. "She just told me she's thinking of disappearing, of walking away from it all. She's emotionally unstable. It's a confession of guilt, don't you see? An innocent woman would fight. A guilty woman runs." She was a masterful double agent, feeding them exactly what they needed. She took Zora's moment of profound emotional exhaustion and twisted it into a legal weapon to be used against her. She was not just betraying a friend, she was actively authoring her destruction, all while telling herself she was simply helping the right side win. "What else?" the lawyer asked, his voice greedy for more ammunition. "She's paranoid," Isabel continued, the lies flowing effortlessly. "She's not planning a real defense. She mentioned something about demanding financial documents. It's a desperate, scattershot tactic. She has no real strategy. She's just flailing. She was brilliant in her treachery. By downplaying Zora's only strategic move, she ensured Alistair's team would see it as a sign of weakness, not the masterfully laid trap it truly was. They would walk into the deposition with an arrogance Isabel had just carefully inflated. When she hung up the phone, she didn't feel a pang of guilt. She felt a surge of exhilaration. She had just proven her value to Alistair. She had just taken a step closer to the life she believed she was owed. This, she told herself, was her own form of strength. She was finally taking what she wanted, just like a man would. The human mind has an infinite capacity for self-deception. We are all the heroes of our own stories. For Isabel, her betrayal wasn't a fall from grace. It was her hero's journey. Zora was a casualty, a necessary sacrifice on the altar of her own ambition. She had traded a lifetime of genuine friendship for the fantasy of a future with a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient, temporary tool. And like all traders, she would not understand the true, devastating cost of her choice until it was far, far too late. Is a betrayal from a close friend who thinks they are doing the right thing more or less painful than a betrayal from an enemy? Share your perspective in the comments below. While Isabel was selling her soul for a fantasy, Alistair Beaumont was in his penthouse office, a glass of scotch in his trembling hand, staring at the man who was about to pronounce his death sentence. Jeffrey, the chief financial officer of Beaumont Global, was a small, neat man whose face was currently the color of old parchment. He hadn't touched the drink Alistair had poured for him. The office was a monument to Alistair's ego, dark wood, leather-bound books he'd never read, and a single, panoramic window that looked down on the city he believed he owned. Tonight, the glittering lights felt like a billion mocking eyes. "Say it again, Jeffrey," Alistair said, his voice dangerously low. "But this time, say it in English." Jeffrey swallowed hard. "It's the derivatives trade, Alistair. The credit default swap you took out against Helios Energy. 2 months ago, at a dinner party, Alistair's biggest rival had publicly bet against Helios, a struggling German energy conglomerate. Driven by pure, uncut ego, Alistair had decided to take the opposite position to humiliate him. He didn't just bet that Helios would survive. He sold an insurance policy against their failure. It's like buying fire insurance on your neighbor's house. You collect premiums as long as it doesn't burn. Alistair sold the insurance, betting the house was fireproof. "This morning," Jeffrey continued, his voice barely a whisper, "Helios Energy declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The house burned down, Alistair. And you're the insurance company." Alistair stared into his glass. "So we pay out. That's business." "There's a problem with that," Jeffrey said, pushing a tablet across the desk. On the screen was a single, terrifying number highlighted in red. The total exposure on the swap was $500 million. The banks that syndicated the deal have issued a margin call. We have to post the collateral, the full $500 million, within 48 hours. Alistair looked up, his charismatic smile gone, replaced by the raw, feral look of a cornered animal. "Liquidate the tech stocks. Sell the Singapore bonds." "We already did," Jeffrey said, his voice cracking. "To cover last quarter's losses." "Alistair, there's no more cash. The company is leveraged to the hilt. We don't have it. We can't even borrow it. No one will give us another line of credit." The reality of the situation finally landed with the force of a physical blow. A margin call isn't a friendly request for payment. It's a demand, backed by the full force of the financial system. If they failed to pay, the banks would have the legal right to start seizing Beaumont Global's assets to cover the debt. It would trigger a catastrophic domino effect, a run on their stock, a panic among their other creditors. It would be a public, humiliating, and total implosion. Bankruptcy. Ruin. The end of the Beaumont name. Alistair walked to the window, his back to Jeffrey. He looked down at the skyscraper with his name on it. He thought of the public adoration, the magazine covers, the fear and respect he commanded. He wasn't just going to lose money. He was going to lose himself. The God King was about to be revealed as a fraud. "There is one asset," Alistair said, his voice a cold, flat line. He turned from the window, and the look in his eyes made Jeffrey flinch. The fear was gone, replaced by a chilling, reptilian cunning. "The prenup." Jeffrey was confused. "The divorce?" "Alistair, what does that have to do with this?" "Clause 7b, Jeffrey. The infidelity clause," Alistair said, a cruel, triumphant smile beginning to form on his lips. "It's a scorched earth provision. If I can prove adultery, she forfeits everything. all marital assets, including her shares in the company. Jeffrey's blood ran cold as he understood. You mean Zora's 10% stake? Exactly, Alistair said, his voice filled with the exhilaration of a man who has just found a loophole in his own execution. That 10% is our last resort. On paper, it's worth nearly $400 million. It's not cash, but it's blue-chip collateral. It's enough. If I can get legal control of her shares, I can pledge them to the banks, satisfy the margin call, and buy us the time we need to survive. The sheer, monstrous cynicism of the plan was breathtaking. The public humiliation at the gala, the manufactured evidence, the vicious legal attack. It wasn't about the divorce at all. It was a calculated, desperate financial maneuver. He wasn't trying to divorce his wife. He was trying to liquidate her. He was planning to sacrifice her reputation, her future, her very identity, to cover up his own catastrophic failure. The public execution at the gala hadn't been an act of spontaneous cruelty. It was step one of a business plan. Alistair, that's barbaric, Jeffrey whispered, horrified. It's survival, Jeffrey. Alistair snapped, his charm completely gone, revealing the raw, ugly predator beneath. Do you think I care about her feelings? She is a line item on a balance sheet, an asset to be leveraged. I will drag her through every sewer in this city if it means I get to keep my name on that building. He leaned over the desk, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. That's why the public attack was so important. It's not just about winning in court, it's about breaking her spirit. If I can make her so toxic, so radioactive that she has no will to fight, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her just to make it stop. I don't need to win a long court battle. I just need her to surrender before the banks come for us. He was so consumed by the brilliance of his own treachery, so blinded by his contempt for the woman he had dismissed as a silent, powerless accessory, that he failed to see the one catastrophic flaw in his plan. His entire scheme, his hope for survival, was built on the foundation of a single, arrogant assumption, that Zora Maxwell owned only 10% of his world. He was about to find out he had made a 9-figure miscalculation. Is it ever justifiable to sacrifice another person's well-being or reputation to save yourself from a crisis you created? Where is the line between self-preservation and pure selfishness? Share your thoughts in the comments. The deposition room was a featureless beige box, designed to be devoid of emotion. It was a sterile arena for legal combat, furnished with a long, polished table, a dozen chairs, and the palpable tension of high-stakes warfare. The air was cool and smelled of paper and a faint, metallic scent of fear. Alistair Beaumont sat on one side of the table, flanked by his legal team, 3 sharks in $1,000 suits. He was the picture of relaxed, predatory confidence, leaning back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. His new girlfriend, Chloe, sat just behind him, a silent, decorative testament to his victory. They believed they were here to finalize a kill. On the other side sat Zora. Her legal team, led by Evelyn Reed, was tense, shuffling papers with nervous energy. But Zora herself was an island of profound calm. She sat perfectly straight, her hands folded on the table, her expression serene. She was not the defendant. She was the judge, jury, and executioner, waiting patiently for the trial to begin. The deposition was a legal formality, an under-oath question-and-answer session to gather evidence before a trial. Alistair's lead lawyer, a man named Sterling, began with a theatrical display of politeness that barely concealed his contempt. For the record, Sterling began, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. We are here today to discuss the claims of infidelity brought against Mrs. Maxwell Beaumont, pursuant to Clause 7B of the prenuptial agreement. But first, some standard procedural matters. He was toying with her, setting the stage, letting her stew in the anticipation of the coming character assassination. He spent 20 minutes on trivialities, confirming her address, her date of birth, establishing the timeline of the marriage. It was a slow, deliberate tightening of the noose. Alistair watched, enjoying the show. Chloe occasionally checked her reflection in her phone, bored. Finally, Sterling arrived at the moment he believed was a simple formality, but which Zora knew was the trigger for the entire trap. Mrs. Maxwell Beaumont, he said, looking down at his notes, as per the standard Rule 26A, financial disclosure you requested, we will need you to state for the record, under oath, the full extent of your personal holdings in Beaumont Global. He looked up, a faint, mocking smile on his lips. The question was a procedural checkbox, a way to establish her small 10% stake before his next move, which would be to legally strip it from her. Zora didn't answer immediately. She turned her head and looked at her lawyer, Evelyn Reed. With a calm, almost imperceptible nod, she gave the signal. Evelyn reached under the table and placed a heavy, leather-bound portfolio on its polished surface. The portfolio was nearly 4 inches thick, secured with brass clasps. The sound it made as it landed on the table was a soft, definitive thud that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Alistair's lawyers paused, a flicker of confusion crossing their faces. "What is that?" Sterling asked, his condescending tone wavering for the first time. "That," Zora said, her voice quiet but carrying the immense weight of the moment, "is my answer." She unsnapped the clasps and opened the portfolio. Inside were not copies, but hundreds of original, notarized, and embossed share certificates, each one representing a block of ownership in Beaumont Global. They were physical, tangible proof of power. She looked directly across the table, not at the lawyer, but at her husband. Her eyes, which had been calm and serene, now held the cold, hard glint of a diamond. "Under oath," she began, her voice steady and clear, "I can state that, as of this morning, I, Zora Maxwell, am the beneficial owner of 90.7% of Beaumont Global." The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum. For a full 3 seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. The number was so absurd, so fundamentally impossible, that their minds simply refused to process it. Then, the room exploded. Alistair leaped from his chair, his face turning a deep, apoplectic red. "That's a lie," he screamed, his voice cracking with a sudden, violent panic. "She's lying. It's a forgery. She's insane." Sterling and his team were frozen, their faces a mask of pure, professional horror. This was not in their playbook. This was a tactical nuclear weapon detonating in the middle of their carefully planned skirmish. Zora's lawyer, Evelyn, stood up, her earlier nervousness gone, replaced by the cool, lethal confidence of a lawyer who knows she has already won. "I assure you it is no lie," she said, her voice cutting through Alistair's ravings. "And if you'll allow me to explain how my client came to be the majority shareholder, I believe you will find every single share is accounted for." She began to lay out the history, her words precise, backed by the mountain of paper in front of her. 10 years ago, Alistair, when your father's company was on the verge of Chapter 7 bankruptcy, my client anonymously saved it by injecting $12 million of her own inheritance through the Cerberus Trust, which she controlled. That seed money was converted into a 40% foundational equity stake. Alistair stared, his mouth agape. "The European investor, that was you?" "That was me," Zora confirmed quietly. Evelyn continued, her voice relentless. "Over the next 8 years, as my client served as the uncredited chief strategy officer for the company, her compensation, at your own insistence, Mr. Beaumont, was paid not in cash, but in restricted stock units and performance-based stock options." She slid a document across the table, a contract signed by Alistair himself. "You called it worthless paper, a hobby. But with every successful acquisition my client orchestrated, every billion-dollar deal she structured, those options vested. While you were taking the credit, she was taking the equity." Evelyn picked up another thick sheaf of papers. She never sold a single share. She simply accumulated. An additional 25% came from vested performance bonuses. Another 15% from stock buyback programs you weren't even aware of. The final 10.7% is the marital property you are so generously trying to seize. It all adds up. It is all legal. It is all documented. And it is all signed by you. Sterling, the lead lawyer, slowly reached out a trembling hand and picked up one of the share certificates. He examined the embossed seal, the watermark, the notarized signature. He looked up, his face ashen, and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head to Alistair. It was real. It was all real. The rage drained from Alistair's face, replaced by a wave of cold, nauseating dread. The blood left his head so quickly he had to grab the back of his chair to keep from collapsing. He looked at Zora, truly looked at her for the first time, not as a quiet accessory, but as the architect of his entire world, and his imminent destruction. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had been a blind, arrogant fool, dancing on the strings she had been quietly, patiently holding all along. The poison pill in the prenup, the infidelity clause, was now a spectacular joke. He had come here today to strip her of her 10% and save his empire. He had just discovered, under oath, that he was a minority shareholder in her kingdom, a kingdom he was about to be exiled from. He had not just lost the divorce. He had lost everything. The deposition didn't end. It simply ceased to matter. Alistair, his lawyers, and Chloe were left frozen in the beige room, ghosts in a world that had already moved on. Zora didn't wait for their shock to subside. She walked out, her team in tow, and as the door clicked shut behind her, the next phase of the war began. It was not a battle to be fought over weeks, but a corporate coup to be executed in a matter of hours. The scene fractures, a rapid-fire montage of a perfectly synchronized attack. Zora's penthouse war room, 2 p.m. Zora's penthouse is no longer a sanctuary, it's a command center. Her legal and financial teams, a squad of the sharpest minds in the country, are assembled. A large screen on the wall shows the logos of dozens of investment funds and individual shareholders. The deposition is concluded, Zora announces, her voice calm and sharp. He walked right into it. Initiate the sequence. Now. Her team moves with practiced speed. One lawyer dials a number. This is Evelyn Reed, counsel for Zora Maxwell, the majority shareholder of Beaumont Global. Pursuant to Corporate Bylaw 3.4, we are invoking the right to call an emergency shareholder meeting, effective immediately. A secure video link will be sent to all registered shareholders in the next 5 minutes. Alistair's office, 2:05 p.m. Alistair bursts into his opulent office, his face a mask of purple rage, screaming into his phone. Sterling, you find a way to stop her. An injunction, a restraining order, I don't care. This is my company. He slams his hand on his keyboard to wake up his computer, but the screen is black. A single line of text appears in white. System access denied. Contact administrator. He stares, his blood running cold. He tries his password again. Denied. Zora's war room, 2:15 p.m. The large screen now shows a grid of video feeds, the faces of Beaumont Global shareholders, patched in from around the world. Zora sits at the head of her conference table, a picture of absolute authority. Thank you for joining on such short notice, she begins, her voice echoing in dozens of offices. As the beneficial owner of 90.7% of this company, I am calling this meeting to order to address a matter of critical financial mismanagement that threatens the immediate solvency of Beaumont Global. Alistair's office, 2:16 p.m. Alistair is frantically trying to join the video call from his personal laptop, but he's been locked out. He can only watch the financial news channels, which have just broken the story. A stunning headline flashes across the bottom of the screen. Shake up at Beaumont Global. Mysterious majority shareholder calls emergency meeting. Int. Zora's war room, 2:20 p.m. Zora's face is impassive as she lays out the facts. Motion 1, she states clearly. A vote for the immediate removal of Alistair Beaumont as Chief Executive Officer on the grounds of gross financial negligence. Specifically, an unauthorized and undisclosed derivatives trade resulting in a $500 million liability that has triggered a margin call and threatens the company with imminent insolvency. She doesn't need to campaign or persuade. She is the vote. I vote aye, she says. With 90.7% of the shares, the motion carries. Alistair Beaumont is removed as CEO, effective immediately. Alistair's office, 2:21 p.m. Alistair watches in horror as his company-issued phone goes dead in his hand. The screen reads, service deactivated. His email on his personal phone stops syncing. A message appears. Your account has been terminated. In the span of a single sentence, spoken in a room miles away, he has been digitally executed, severed from the empire he thought he commanded. Zora's war room, 2:25 p.m. Zora moves to the next item without pausing. Motion 2. A vote to dissolve the current board of directors, pending a full investigation into their complicity in the concealment of the company's financial state. She looks into the camera. I vote aye. The motion carries. The board is dissolved. On the screen, the video feeds of Alistair's father and his cronies blink out one by one, their access revoked in real time. Alistair's office, 2:30 p.m. Two large men in sharp suits, the building's internal security, enter Alistair's office. They don't look at him with the deference of employees. They look at him with the cold indifference of men following orders. Sir, one of them says, his voice polite but firm. We've been instructed to escort you from the premises. Your access has been revoked. You can't do this. Alistair roars, a king with no subjects. I am Alistair Beaumont. Our orders come directly from the new chairperson, the guard replies, unmoved. Zora's war room, 2:35 p.m. Final motion for this session, Zora says, her voice as calm as ever. A vote to freeze all executive accounts, credit lines, and severance packages pending the results of a full, independent forensic audit. We need to stop the bleeding before we can begin to heal the wound. I vote aye, she declares. The motion carries. The accounts are frozen. This was the final, brutal stroke. She wasn't just taking his power, she was taking his money. He could no longer use the company's vast resources to fund a legal fight against her. He was cut off, isolated, and powerless. The coup was over. It had taken less than an hour. It was entirely legal, perfectly executed, and utterly unstoppable. She had used the company's own bylaws, the very rules designed to protect the power structure, to dismantle it from within. She had not staged a hostile takeover from the outside. She had revealed that she was the house, and she was simply cleaning it of its unwanted guests. The silent, powerless wife had just become the undisputed queen. Is it more effective to defeat an enemy with a loud public battle or a quiet, internal coup? Share your thoughts on strategy in the comments below. The CEO's office at the top of the Beaumont Global Tower was a glass-walled cage suspended in the sky. For years, it had been Alistair's throne room, a place where he looked down on the world he thought he owned. Now it belonged to Zora. She sat behind the massive obsidian desk, not in the oversized leather chair he had favored, but in a simple, elegant one she'd had brought in. She wasn't occupying his space, she was cleansing it. The air, once thick with the scent of his cologne and self-satisfaction, was now clean and still. The doors opened. Alistair was escorted in, not by police, but by two impassive corporate security guards. He was a king in chains, though the chains were invisible. The fight was gone. His perfectly tailored suit, the one he had worn with such arrogance, now hung on him like a costume on a broken mannequin. His face was a ruin, gray, gaunt, his charismatic blue eyes now dull with the vacant shock of a man who has fallen from a great height and somehow survived the impact, only to find himself paralyzed. He stood before the desk, a supplicant in the temple of his own former power. Zora, in contrast, was a portrait of serene control. Her emotional journey was over. This was simply the accounting. She didn't look at him with hatred or triumph. She looked at him with the cool, detached gaze of a creditor about to review a delinquent account. "Sit down, Alistair," she said, her voice calm. It was not a request. He collapsed into the chair opposite her. "Zora, please," he began, his voice a ragged whisper. "Whatever you're planning, there has to be another way." "There is no other way," she replied, her voice as smooth and hard as the desk between them. "There is only the bill. And today, we are going to review it, item by item." She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Let's start with the $500 million margin call from your disastrous Helios trade. The one that was about to bankrupt this company in 48 hours. Alistair stared at the paper, uncomprehending. How did you know about that?" "I know everything, Alistair. I built this company, remember?" she said, a flicker of ice in her tone. "The banks were preparing to seize the company's assets. I stopped them. At 3:15 p.m. yesterday, I personally wired the full $500 million from my private accounts to satisfy the debt. Your mess has been cleaned up." A tiny, pathetic spark of hope lit Alistair's eyes. "Then we're safe?" "The company is safe." "The company is safe," Zora confirmed. "You, however, are not." She slid another document toward him. "This is a lien. To cover the $500 million I paid on your behalf, I have taken possession of all your remaining personal assets as collateral. The Beacon Hill mansion, the art collection, the penthouse in Monaco, the vintage cars. Everything of value that carries the Beaumont name is now legally mine." The spark in his eyes died, replaced by a wave of cold, nauseating dread. He was not just fired. He was homeless. He was penniless. "The prenup," he stammered, clinging to the last piece of wreckage. "Clause 7b, my lawyers said." "Your lawyers," Zora interrupted, her voice cutting, "were operating on the fraudulent information you provided them." She slid a third folder across the desk. It was filled with photographs, grainy, long-lens shots of Alistair and Chloe entering hotels, sharing intimate dinners, kissing on a private yacht. "While you were paying witnesses to invent my infidelity, I was simply documenting your truth. The prenup has been voided due to your own flagrant and well-documented adultery. You have no claim to anything. In fact, under the terms, you now owe me." He was speechless, a fish gasping for air in a vacuum. "And finally," Zora said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone, "there is the matter of your trade itself. The SEC was very interested to learn about an off-the-books, high-risk derivatives trade made without board approval, a trade whose catastrophic losses were deliberately concealed from shareholders. They call that corporate fraud, Alistair. You are now under federal investigation. The final word landed with the force of a physical blow. Prison. The abstract horror was now a concrete possibility. The king was not just dethroned, he was in chains. The consequences rippled outward, swift and merciless. That evening, Alistair sat in a high-end restaurant, a place where he once commanded the best table by merely walking in. He tried to order a bottle of vintage champagne, but his credit card was declined. And then the next one. Flushed with shame, he was forced to confess to Chloe, who sat opposite him looking bored. The money, there's a temporary issue. Chloe, a woman whose entire ambition was tied to financial ascent, didn't scream or rage. She simply stood up, smoothed down her dress, and without a single word, turned and walked out of the restaurant and his life, leaving him alone at the table with the unpaid bill. Isabel's fate was a different kind of execution. The transcripts from her treacherous phone calls to Alistair's lawyers had been entered as evidence in the divorce proceedings. They were leaked. Within hours, she became a social pariah, a Judas in Chanel. The friends she had betrayed Zora for now turned their backs on her, whispering as she passed. She was exiled to a social Siberia far colder than any prison, her name a permanent synonym for traitor. Back in the office, Alistair sat, a broken man staring at the ruins of his life. Zora watched him, her face impassive. "So you have a choice," she said, her voice pulling him from his daze. "Two paths. The first is clear. You can fight. You can hire new lawyers and face the SEC. You will lose. You will be publicly disgraced, convicted of fraud, and you will spend what should be the best years of your life in a federal prison." She let him absorb the horror of that reality. "Or," she continued, "there is a second path." She slid a final document across the desk. It was a single page. "This is a transfer of ownership for your final 9.3% of company stock and a non-disclosure agreement, so absolute you will never be able to speak the name Beaumont Global again. You will sign it. You will walk out of this building, out of this city, and you will disappear. You will live a quiet, anonymous life somewhere no one has ever heard your name. You will be a ghost." It wasn't a choice between freedom and prison. It was a choice between two kinds of annihilation. A loud, public one, or a quiet, private one. He looked up at her, his eyes hollow, finally understanding the totality of his defeat. He, Alistair Beaumont, the man who had stood on stage and declared she would be left with nothing, was now being offered the very same fate. He had spat in the face of a queen, and she had responded not with rage, but by calmly, legally, and completely erasing him from the world. Is it more devastating to lose your fortune, your freedom, or your name? Share your thoughts on what you think is the ultimate price to pay in the comments. 6 months later, the skyscraper that had once been a monument to Alistair Beaumont's ego was now a beacon of innovation. The name Beaumont Global was gone, stripped from the glass and steel and replaced with a new elegant logo, Maxwell Global. Inside, the dark wood and leather of the old regime had been replaced with open-concept spaces, glass walls, and an atmosphere of vibrant, collaborative energy. The company, under Zora's brilliant and ethical leadership, was not just surviving. It was thriving, posting its most profitable quarter in a decade. But Zora's true victory was not to be found on a balance sheet. It was being unveiled today. She stood at a podium in a brightly lit auditorium, facing a sea of reporters and flashing cameras. She was the same woman from the gala, but now she radiated a calm, unshakable power that was entirely her own. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice warm and steady. "Today, we are not here to talk about profits or projections. We are here to talk about purpose. I have learned, through a very public and personal journey, that true wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you give back. And sometimes the most powerful way to build a new future is to use the rubble of the past." She gestured to the screen behind her, where a new logo appeared. The design was elegant, but the name was a quiet, exquisitely aimed final blow. The Beaumont Foundation for Second Chances. A ripple of shock went through the press corps. The irony was breathtaking. "The foundation," Zora continued, a faint, knowing smile on her lips, "will be funded by the complete liquidated personal assets of the foundation's namesake. Its mission is simple but urgent: to provide grants, legal support, and strategic mentorship to women who have been financially and emotionally devastated by divorce and betrayal, women who have been told they are worthless and left with nothing. She had taken his name, the name he had tried to use to crush her, and transformed it into a permanent symbol of her own legacy. Every woman this foundation helped, every life it rebuilt, would be a testament to his failure and her strength. It was not just revenge, it was a checkmate so absolute, it rewrote the rules of the game. The story doesn't end there, in the applause of a press conference. It ends in a quiet cafe, a few weeks later. Zora sat across from a young black woman, her face a mixture of fear and a fragile, flickering hope. She was the first recipient of the Beaumont Foundation's grant, a brilliant entrepreneur whose husband had just tried to leave her penniless, stealing her business ideas in the process. "He told me I was nothing without him," the young woman whispered, her eyes filled with a familiar pain. "That I would fail." Zora reached across the table and placed her hand over the young woman's. "What a man like that tells you is a reflection of his own fear, not your reality," Zora said, her voice soft but filled with the unshakable strength she had forged in the fire. "He didn't see your power, so he tried to extinguish it. Our job," she said, a warm, genuine smile spreading across her face, "is to show him just how brightly you can burn on your own." In that small cafe, the true Queen's gambit was complete. She had not just taken a king and conquered a kingdom. She had used her victory to ensure that a new generation of queens would have the power to build their own. The cycle of pain was broken, replaced by a legacy of empowerment. If this story of justice and turning pain into power moved you, help us share it with the world. Every like, share, and subscription helps us tell more stories that matter. Join our community, and let's continue to celebrate the power of resilience together.